All righty, we're going to go ahead and get started this morning. I'm Glen Arnold. I'm the field specialist for manure nutrient management in Ohio. Work for Ohio State. I'll be your first speaker. I've got some help here with me today. You got Garth Ruff, the county educator in Henry County, Sam Custer from Darke County, and Amanda Doritas from Champaign County. I'll be helping with the CCA sign-in sheets and those types of things. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I know many of you got to get your CCA and CLM credits in here today, and we'll work with you on that as well. But we're going to try to let you know some of our latest and greatest research, what we're trying to work on, and maybe where we want to go with some new research starting this growing season. You know, those of us who live in Northwest Ohio get hammered constantly with the Lake Erie issues. Nutrient management is really important. And the low-hanging fruit on the blame game is the livestock people, simply because when we apply manure, it's much more visible, much more odorous, and lots more complaints than when commercial fertilizer is applied. So we need to be aware of that. And also, there's a lot of talk that in this calendar year of 2018, the manure application rules for our watershed in Northwest Ohio will probably change. There's quite a bit of stuff going back and forth right now. The governor's pretty interested in making some changes. So whether that's going to be additions to Senate Bill 1, whether that'll be executive action by the governor at some point, we're not sure. But those of us who work in the industry think we're going to see changes in the manure application process or the rules, at least to our Lake Erie watershed, if some of them don't go statewide. So just keep your ear to the grindstone, listen up on what the possibilities are. But our watershed does touch 24 of the 88 counties in the state. It's a pretty big thing, about 3.2 million acres in the state of Ohio. When you compare that to the Grand Lake St. Mary's with their 47,000 acre watershed down there, you can see how big and how cumbersome it will be if they used words like distressed or impaired watershed, things like that. If they require nutrient management plans to be written over a period of time, imagine how many more it's going to take to get all those written up than what they've been doing down here in the Grand Lake St. Mary's, where everybody had 2 years to come to get their manure plans written. They had 2 years to get it done, and 4 of all the farmers in the watershed, 4 did not get them done in the 2-year time period. And as we talk about nutrient management, just always keep this graph in mind. All this is a graph of 4 watersheds. One of those is the Maumee River. Another is the Sandusky. Now, the Sandusky goes straight from Bucyrus north and goes to Lake Erie. The Maumee would be the one that goes through, catches everything from Kenton over to Salina, brings it north, and runs through Defiance on its way. Then you've got the Honey Creek and the Rock Creek. They're much smaller watersheds. They're in the Sandusky watershed area. But the point I want to make with all of these is, if you graph the Heidelberg College water data, all 4 of those watersheds show almost the same curve. And if we were to go down to Zanesville and grab that watershed data, we might come up with something very similar. All it shows is that the level of dissolved phosphorus in the water has started from about 1993 and has gone upward ever since. If that's true for all the watersheds in the state, which it probably is, because these 4 are nothing special, no livestock influence, no poultry litter influence, no major influence. But if that's true for all the watersheds, which I think it is, then Lake Erie's not going to get any better anytime soon. We've got to figure out how to stop these upward lines. I think most of that comes back to surface application of nutrients, phosphorus, in either commercial fertilizer or manure. They did some surveys of our watershed up there, and roughly it sounds like about 60% of the manure applied in the Northwest area is not incorporated, which really surprised me. I didn't think it was near that high. But again, that would contribute to that. We've got to figure out ways to get manure placed in the ground, for those of you who have a manure interest. So the 4 R's applies to manure as well. Right place, right time, right product, right amount. And I'm just going to drive that home over and over and over. We are kind of been in a building frame here. We handle about 2.5 billion gallons of dairy manure and wastewater in a year in Ohio. I estimate that we probably handle about 1 billion gallons a year of hog manure. If our hog building numbers are correct, we probably added another 70 million over the next 12 months as we grow the hog industry in the state. All that's in response to the cold water plant that's being built. They're killing right now 8,000 pigs per shift. Once they get a few kinks worked out, they think they'll be at 10,000 pigs per shift. Once they get that shift all figured out, then they'll probably go to another shift someday to make the plant more efficient. So we would all sit down and go through another 100 finishing buildings being built in the state. And then the other thing I'll throw out here is, roughly on the western side of the state, it looks like about half our manure is put out in the fall. And again, there's been various surveys done of our watershed. Some surveys would show that we have more winter manure applied than what I've got, but I think most of my data deals more with liquid manures, whereas the small beef producers and people like that I probably didn't catch in this type of a survey. So we probably have a little more there with the solid beef guys, but they're small enough that they don't really contribute a lot, in my opinion, to our manure numbers. But generally our manure application is dictated by what growing crops there are in the field. If we don't get the manure hauled in the fall, then we get into winter. Did we have a good manure hauling year last fall? Not really. Now, we ended up with a beautiful little window from the end of November to the 1st of December, about a 10-day window that we got a lot done. But if it hadn't have been for that window, we would have more of this going on this year than ever before. Now, about 3.5 weeks ago, we could all see this winter thaw coming. We could see, we had a lot of snow in my area, but we could see on the weather forecast we had a thaw coming. So what did farmers do who needed to haul manure? They hauled. They put it right on top of the snow, and we had a lot of calls from northern Mercer, southern Van Wert, places like that, where a lot of manure was put on top of snow. And what happens is when it begins to melt, then we have challenges of trying to keep it all together. So in the old days, the Soil and Water would get a call and they'd come out and they would look at the manure, and if you had your growing cover crop that we require in northwest Ohio and your weather forecast was not more than a ½ inch of rain the next 24 hours and you kept your setback distances, you were probably okay. Today, you're going to have people come back time and time again and look at that field, waiting for that manure to get closer to the edge. And then when there is manure into the ditch, you will have a water violation and you'll be fined. We had 3 fish kills. We had about another dozen manure escapes last year in northwest Ohio. So we're kind of a lot of attitude of enough's enough on some of that out there. When I work with the liquid manures, I always try to drive home that if we can figure out ways to capture the nitrogen, I believe we can almost get our manure hauled for free. And that's going to be my argument as we go forward here. This is simply a swine finishing manure sample. And I realize it's small for you guys, so I'll read it off to you. But we do our manure analysis in pounds per 1,000 gallons. In this example, we have a total nitrogen in this swine manure of 37.68 pounds of nitrogen in 1,000 gallons of manure. When you think of swine manure, realize that almost all of it is in the ammonium form. NH4. Of that 37.68, we have 35.97. All but 1 pound is in the ammonium form of nitrogen. The other form of nitrogen that's most common in livestock manure is going to be the organic form. And this liquid manure sample was 1.73 pounds per 1,000 gallons. If it were a dairy sample, the organic would probably be quite a bit higher because of the fiber in the feed. However, I would say that as the dairies have switched from organic bedding sources to sand and other inorganic sources of bedding, those numbers have switched quite a bit too. What I look for, as a person who works with a lot of manure on research projects, I look for manures that have a 2-to-1 nitrogen to P2O5 ratio. If you follow this sample down a little further, they have 12.36 pounds of P2O5 in 1,000 gallons. Is 12 less than half of 37.68? Sure is. For me, this will make an excellent fertilizer product for one of my Sidedress plots that I would work with. And then on K2O, this sample has almost 30 pounds of K2O per 1,000 gallons, quite a bit. And then I'm just going to throw out that little comment down here at the bottom that this swine manure sample has 2.83 pounds of sulfur per 1,000 gallons. Why do I say that? How many people need sulfur in Ohio in their soil tests now? Quite a bit. Most livestock people won't, because you have sulfur in your hog manure and your dairy manure to a certain extent, and poultry litter. So for those who have that theory in the back of their head that the lack of acid rain is one of the contributors to those upward trends on all those watersheds, livestock manure might be a solution to that. I don't know if that theory is right or not, but it's certainly one that's floating out there that's just as strong as some of the other theories that we've had. All right, certainly better than the theory that mega farms are the cause of Lake Erie turning green. Now, years ago, we started with wheat plots. In 2006, this toy was sitting in Putnam County for repairs, so we talked to the company and they let us play with it. All we did is we went out and we injected manure in wheat on March 1st with this thing. It's a Veen-Heinzen toolbar, also known as a grassland applicator. And you can see where we slice open the wheat and we place the manure over top of that slice. So we call that incorporated manure. Now, I had to walk a long time across the field to find a spot where I didn't chop the wheat out too badly. All right, so I'm not going to lie to you and say I steered all the way down. But we compared it to urea, and we also did some surface manure application. The following year, we couldn't get that toolbar back, so we just took a tanker, took an old pecan toolbar, made some adjustments to it. We did surface application. We did incorporated manure. The combine had a 30-foot head at that time, so 3 trips across with that 13.5-foot toolbar were necessary to make that work out. There's a surface application going across. But we did that for 3 years to find out, could manure be a good replacement for urea on wheat? That was the purpose of the research. So if you looked at the 3 years that we did it, the gold bar is the surface applied swine manure using that little pecan toolbar, using that tanker and the tractor. The red was the incorporated manure, and the gray was the urea that we used. And again, we aimed for about 105 to 110 units of nitrogen per acre with each of our 3 sources there, or 3 application methods, 2 sources. We came back in 2008, had a terrible wheat year, but they were all similar in their yields. Come back in 2009 with a tremendous wheat year, and again, the yields are pretty similar. It proved what we thought. We can actually go out there, we can replace urea on wheat with manure that we already own and make that work. This is just a picture of Jerry Neese, who passed away back in January. But this is Jerry Neese up in Ohio. He's on northwest Ohio. He's on a weenie cutter field, simply top dressing wheat about April 1st, right about there, with 4,000 gallons of manure per acre. And this has worked very well for us. Now, that would be a vegetated field, so you'd want to stay back 35 feet from the edges with that drag hose when you did that. I'd like to stay back a little more and just make one pass around the field with the fertilizer buggy at the end. Again, just picked up his toolbar. He typically would have been running through a corn stubble field or something like that, and made that work. And you can see the hose drags across the wheat very well. Never really had an issue with it. There's a number of farmers in Mercer and Darke County who do this now. They'll put swine manure on wheat, and they may harvest the wheat for silage, or they may take the wheat to yield, and it's just another use of livestock manure, and it works out real well for us. We've had other uses of swine manure as well. This is hog farmer in Allglaze County from a couple years ago. He planted his wheat in the fall. Then he had the commercial manure applicator come in and splash swine manure on at 5,000 gallons per acre a couple days after planting. Again, we've had a couple dry Novembers, not last year in particular, but this is another good example coming out of Indiana. Farmer sent me this. He incorporated 12,000 gallons of dairy manure ahead of wheat planting, and felt real good about, again, we had a dry November, so the difference that the manure made to get the wheat out of the ground and growing, he thought was time well spent. So again, we're trying to come up with alternative windows, alternative times when we can apply manure. Now we've also done a number of small tanker plots. Now small tanker plots I say because compaction's not an issue here. If you look at this chart, this is 5 years of data from Hoytville. Everything above my hand are pre-emergent plots. When we started these plots, I thought if I ever wanted to drag hose corn, I had to wait, or I had to get it on before the corn had emerged out of the ground. Everything below that center are post-emergent plots. Our treatments are incorporated 28%, 200 pounds per acre of nitrogen, 5,000 gallons per acre of incorporated swine manure, which got me 200 units of nitrogen per acre. Surface applied swine manure, 200 units of nitrogen per acre. Incorporated dairy manure at 13,500 gallons per acre, which did not give me enough nitrogen, so I had to add 28 pounds of nitrogen as UAN, 65 pounds. And then dairy manure, again, with 65 pounds of nitrogen as UAN added. And we can mix that right with the dairy manure if we choose to. You can bring up the nitrogen level of swine manure, nursery manure, dairy manure by adding 28. So if you look at the years, and again, here are the post plots at the bottom, if you come across and look at the data at the far side, 5 years summarized together, 3 droughts, 1 great growing season, and 1 so-so season. If you compare the incorporated 28% with the incorporated swine manure for 5 years running, we have incorporated swine manure, incorporated 28% here, 5 years running. We've run about 15 bushels per acre positive on the incorporated swine manure. And on the post plots down here, we run about 18.6 positive. So the incorporated manure, partly because of perhaps the liquid, partly because of the availability of the ammonium nitrogen over the commercial 28, maybe partly due to the tillage effect of a Dietrich sweep going through the field. Whichever of those you want to give credit for, we found a nice positive in there. Now, a lot of guys have begun to surface apply manure on corn in my area, both pre-emergent and post-emergent corn. And if I look at my surface applied, the difference between incorporated and surface applied, we dropped down by 26 bushel per acre on the incorporated, and we dropped down by 26 bushel on the post-emergent plots as well. Primarily, we think, because we're leaving our nitrogen on the surface and we're losing it to volatilization, or if we get the right amount of rainfall, perhaps denitrification. On a positive side, I would point out that 142.6 versus 141 is really just a 10 bushel difference between 28 incorporated and surface applied manure. Down here, 28 incorporated at 144.8, surface applied manure at 137. Not so bad. I understand the logic behind the surface applied manure. So I understand that, but it's just something to think about. And again, if you compare the dairy, we're in a similar boat, that the dairy manure performs very well, but we lose a lot when we leave the dairy manure on top of the ground. Just remember that 15 number, or that 18 number, because we're going to come back to that at some point. We've also done a bunch of tanker plots across northwest Ohio for a number of years. We've drug tankers from Versailles up to Wauseon, up almost to the Michigan line. Just again, all we did was take the flotation tires off of a manure tanker, replace those with payloader tires. Again, payloader tires could handle the weight. And then we've essentially side-dressed corn on side-by-side plots with quite a few farmers, about 50 plots or so over 5 years. And again, you can see the compaction issue. We're trying to take it out with the Dietrich sweeps coming through. And a lot of farmers have said, yeah, this is slow and this is cumbersome, so we're not excited about it. But at least it shows the potential of putting manure on corn in a real-world situation if the opportunity presents itself. Some people will do this and leave the tanker in the field and service the tanker by bringing semis of manure to it. Other people that I've talked to are thinking that they'll someday put tracks on tankers and try to alleviate the compaction issue and make that work out a little bit better for them. Regardless, we wanted to do the same thing with manure on corn as we did with wheat. Start with tanker research, then grow to drag hose research. When we first started this, we didn't think we could do it on emerged corn. We thought it had to be still underground. But this is Harrod Farms in Darke County. They're running a VTI unit. You can see they run over every single stalk of corn in the field with that drum that serves as a height control adjustment for the VTI unit. But they're applying their swine finishing manure to a no-till cornfield in about early June, and I think I've got one more of that, at a rate of about 6,000 to 6,500 gallons per acre. And that provides all of their side-dress nitrogen. The only thing this field gets is 10 gallons of 28 as starter nitrogen, and then everything else is provided. All side-dress nitrogen and the P and the K are provided by their swine manure. Now, they've been doing this now for 4 years in Darke County. And then they leave strips of 28 for us to come in and help out with harvest time. You can see how the hose comes across. We didn't quite get the manure incorporated entirely because it was a little wet that day, but still way better than leaving it on top of the ground, we think. If you look at a drone video, we were fortunate enough last year to get a drone up in the air. Now, Harrod's borrowed a university toolbar. We have two 12-row toolbars that Ohio State has gotten through some grant money, and we're going to have a third one pretty soon. You can see them turning on the end, and they're going to head back down. They plant their fields at a 45-degree angle to make the drag hose work out. For those of you who've ever worked with drag hoses, they need each pull to be shorter as they go across the field if they want to do it unassisted, not have a second tractor. Nice of him to kick Sam Custer out on the turn there. But this is the drag hose of Harrod's going across. Now, they like their drag hose to ride higher on the ground. So what they did is they drop out the center unit of tillage, and they run 150% manure to each side of the center row. And then they put a shank in every single row because they plant with RTK. They apply manure with RTK. So this is how they made their drag hose effort this past year work out. Now, this was a field that was planted on April 25th, and many of you know we got to do a lot of replanting this year, as did Harrod's. You'll see in here an occasional plant from the April 25th planting, but they end up replanting this thing on June 5th. And we're in there about June 15th or June 20th doing this manure application. And the difference between the manure and the 28 this past year was right at 20 bushel per acre. The manure was to the positive. At harvest time, they usually let Samurai ride with them. You can see the snout of the combine. You can see the weed control is excellent. The sandability of the corn is excellent. No sled runners, no major issues with that. So we feel like we've got a pretty good system. Essentially what they do is they try to leave about a 40 to 50 acre field available near each of their finishing buildings each year, and that's where their swine manure goes. They put out enough in the fall that they could reach wheat season if they had to. But the idea is try to put the manure on the corn and capture that nitrogen. Again, if you look at how their numbers have worked out, last year we were about 20 positive for the manure. In 2016, looks like we were about 6 positive for the manure. In 2015, we were about 33 positive for the manure. 2015, it was a real wet year. If you remember, this field would have gotten more than 10 inches of rain in the first 30 days of after application. So it looks like the manure nitrogen hangs around for us on wet years and dry years better than the commercial fertilizer does. The first year we played with it, we were mudding out there and about broke even. But over the 4 years, they're running at 14.8 bushel per acre. I was somewhere between 14 and 18 on my small plots. Yes?
Is any of this product, Manure or 28, treated with stabilizer?
No. The question was, is either the manure or the 28 treated with stabilizer? The answer is no. Now, the manure probably has a pit additive to keep it in a liquidy form and to keep flies down in the hog building and stuff. I'll agree there. But nothing was done in going to the field, right? Their thought process is that if you figure that they did not apply $75 per acre of sidedress nitrogen, and they got a 14.8 bushel yield bump and $3.40 corn, they're running right at about $125 an acre or better. Now, you're going to apply that manure at some point. We could subtract from that, certainly, and say already it cost us $70 an acre to have that manure put on. And we could subtract that off of there. I would agree with that. But I would also argue that you're going to apply that manure at some point anyhow. You could either put it on your corn in June, or you can put it on your wheat stubble in July. It's going to cost you the same. The difference is you didn't have to buy that sidedress nitrogen in the corn scenario there. So that's why we've got the numbers as they are right now. The other thing I look at, and we've really got to look at this, is the balance of the P2O5. If you look at how Harrods have this set up, here's their projected rotation. 200 bushel corn crop, a 60 bushel bean crop. Corn will remove 0.37 pounds of P2O5 per gallon or per bushel of corn removed from the field, and 0.27 pounds of K2O per bushel of corn removed. If you look at beans, beans will take out 0.8 pounds of P2O5 per bushel removed and 1.4 pounds of K2O per bushel removed. So when you do the math, 200 bushel corn crop takes out 74 pounds of P2O5. Bean crop takes out 48 pounds of P2O5 for a 2-year removal of 122 pounds of P2O5 from the field. When Harrods come in with their sidedress every other year, which is every 2 years, they will apply 117 pounds of P2O5 based on their manure tests. So over a 2-year period of time, they're roughly at break even on their P2O5. If they wanted to build the field, they could increase their manure application rate a little bit. If they wanted to reduce their P2O5, we could enhance that manure with some 28 to bring the nitrogen level up, and we could back off on a 6,500 gallon rate. K2O happens to balance pretty much as well. You remove 54 with the corn crop, remove 84 with the bean crop, apply 138 for a total of 138 removed, then we put 143 on when we do the actual application itself. Why is that balance important? I honestly think they're going to reduce the levels in farm fields that we're able to apply manure or any nutrient in the years ahead. Hopefully not this year, but in the years ahead. We have got to show good stewardship with our manure application. Now again, on P2O5, you have to add or subtract 20 pounds to move your soil test 1 pound per acre or 1 part or 2 parts per million. On K2O, you have to add or subtract about 14 pounds to move your P2O5 or your K2O level 1 pound per acre or 2 parts per million. So Harrods would expect essentially their soil tests to generally remain unchanged with this type of a rotation. So again, we think that's a really big selling point to legislators and people who are going to be decision makers in the state on our water quality issues. This is how we simply add 28 to manure plots. We have the stand over here loading this tanker. We've got a 28 applicator we're adding, and we can enhance the manure. For example, on a dairy plot I was doing a couple of years ago, we knew that the dairy manure had about 10 units of nitrogen per 1,000 gallons. This is a 5,250 gallon tank. So if I get about 5,000 gallons applied down and back, that's 12 rows in a quarter-mile field. When you take the end rows off, that comes out to about 8/10 of an acre. 5,000 gallons applied to 8/10 of an acre is a 6,000 gallon per acre application rate. If I got 10 units of nitrogen from each 1,000 gallons, I put 60 units of nitrogen on with the manure. So in this instance, if I needed another 60 units of nitrogen, I would simply put on add 20 gallons of 28% to that manure tanker. And at 3 pounds per each gallon, I get another 60. If I wanted 75, I would add a little more, 28. So it's simply a matter of timing how long it takes one of these to fill a 5-gallon bucket and turn it on accordingly. Once that little guy couldn't help me anymore, I just strapped that hose right to the side of that loading chute and accomplished the same thing. But it was great having him going up and down those steps all day for me that day. Now the question comes back to how tall can the corn be? Every year for the last 4 years, we have drag hosed corn plots in Hoytville at our research farm. We simply have a short drag hose that we fill with water. We go across the corn, then we turn right around and go back across it. So we hit it twice. And we also try to hit corn at the V1 stage of growth, V2, V3, V4, and V5. We only stop at V5 because that's all the room I've got at the research plot. This is V5 corn, and I can tell you right now today we don't need to be flattening V5 corn anymore because see how we snap it off here? See this pile of corn here where we windrowed it? You know, we kind of drug it for a few feet and then it dropped off. V5 corn is too tall. We knock off approximately 40 bushel per acre with this drag hose. Now, if we added 18 back in with the manure, you know, maybe it's a little bit tempting, but not really. If you look at our data, if you look at 2014, 15, 16, and 17, so we'll probably do this one more year, so we have data for 5 years, and we look at the drag hose stages, V1, V2, V3, V4, and V5, and you follow the numbers over. This is the yield. As I come across here, on the no drag hose row, I've averaged 155.5 by not touching the corn at all and 4 replications, okay? When I flatten it twice at V1, I'm averaging about that, 158 roughly. When I flatten corn twice at V2, I'm right here at 156. When I flatten it twice at V3, I'm right here at 160. And when I flatten it twice at V4, it looks like that's where the break is right there. And of course at V5, we really get murdered here every year. It looks like on 3 of the 4 years, this one, and this one, the V4 corn worked out almost as well as not getting flattened at all. But there was 1 year where the V corn didn't work out very well. That was that really wet year. So I'm still uncertain as to whether the corn was a little further advanced than we thought, or whether it was just physically taller at the same stage of growth than maybe it had been the other years. So that gives me a little leeriness right there. But we feel real comfortable at V3 that we can flatten corn. So just so we're all in the same boat, this is what we call V3 corn. This first leaf, the rounded leaf that's rounded like the end of your thumb, we call this the V1 once it's got a leaf or a collar attachment. Then the second leaf here, V2, it's got a true collar. I can see it right there. So that would be V2. This leaf here has a collar. It's gripping the plant like you would grip a shovel. So that's V3. These 2 leaves, neither have yet to form a collar. So even though there's 5 leaves visible, this is V3 corn. And this is the size of the corn that Harrods wait for theirs to be in Darke County when they do their drag hose work. So we know we can go up to that tall. When it first spikes through the ground, there's not much of a root system. When we tore out a bunch of corn 4 years ago on one of these plots, we thought between the hose settling down in and dragging, doing a little what we call road grading, or there's another term I'll come up with on that. But again, it seems like the better the root system, the better the corn handles the bashing of the hose. Now there are other systems out there as well. This is the Cadman system that they developed, which I think is the Cadillac of manure application systems at this point. Some of the advantages. This is a great big hose reel. It's a solid hose. It's got its own AB line on the end of the field. It knows where to position itself for each time the farmer wants to take a trip down the field. So this is hooked up to a 16-row airway. That cabinet basically puts itself in place. Then down the field, the applicator can go. And it's not working as smoothly there as normally, but that's the design of this system. It's got an extra long stinger on the back, and I'll show you in a minute why we have that. But they can go through corn taller than these chairs. Remember I said we couldn't do anything higher than about V3 to V4 corn. Well, this is a system that could go a lot further than that. When they get all the way down the far end, they simply turn on the end of the field with this applicator, and they come back in the next 16 rows. So that hard hose remains in the row that it went down the field, and then it simply is withdrawn ahead of you. When he gets to the end and he makes that turn, that hose reel will move over to the next 16 rows and make it possible. What's that? Right now, it's probably not competitively priced, so that's one of the biggest reasons you see the holdup on it. But I think it has a bright future. I think there's a lot of potential for this toolbar in the years ahead. The patent for that is held by a couple farmers out of Mercer County, believe it or not. So again, you can kind of see the design of this. They call it a continuous manure applicator. Their thought process is that once they get in a tractor and take off, they should be able to run all day long with this machine. Now we have two toolbars that we used this past year in Ohio, compliments of a lot of companies that threw in money, companies and foundations, to try to take this technology out to the hands of people who would use it. This is a Bazooka FarmStar toolbar, a 12-row applicator. This is the Dietrich unit made by Bombauers that we used this year as well. This is a dairy farm in Fulton County last June that he harvested his cereal rye for silage, planted no-till corn into the rye stubble, and then here we are side dressing his corn with our Bazooka toolbar. We borrowed a tractor and we had a commercial applicator provide the hoses and pumps and stuff like that. You can see the dairy building in the background there. Essentially, he left some strips in the field for anhydrous ammonia. And he got 25 tons per acre with the anhydrous ammonia and 24.25 tons per acre with his manure. So we feel pretty good that we were pretty competitive, even though we didn't quite get it covered up as well as we wanted to that day. Remember I said Harrods planted their corn at a 45-degree angle to make it work out for the drag hose? This is Fry Brothers from Williams County, the commercial applicators. They worked out a system to do straight rows of corn with the Sidedress toolbar. Essentially, this is that same dairy farm. They've skipped 12 rows here for a comparison. You can see where we've already made some previous turns on the end. I love these drone videos because you can get in the air and get a better view of what's going on. But essentially what he's going to do is he's got the drag hose behind him, and he's going to go down through there, and he's going to make a turn on the end. Under ideal conditions, we'd like to make a U-turn, but we don't have enough power here, enough tractor, so we have to make a 3-point turn with this tool. On the drag hoses, you've got to keep the weight of the pull behind you, not off to one side or the other. So we've got Jason driving the tractor, we've got Dave in the 8300 John Deere, and he's got a hose humper or hose hustler that he's waiting to help with the turn on the end. So again, we're doing a 1/4 mile field. The tractor stops at the end, makes a 3-point turn. I have no idea why that blanks out like that, but anyhow. And then Dave's going to get hit on his horse, and he's going to come in there and he's going to hook onto that hose, and then he's going to anchor it. You can see previously on previous turns where he's anchored before. You can see it down here. And he's going to anchor there. And he's going to make that work out. Now we did this for fields in Fulton County, Paulding County, and Wyandotte County last summer that we did plots in. We did pull the hose apart once in Paulding County, but that was the only problem, only time we did. Now this does put more pressure on the drag hose. I don't disagree. That's been one of the biggest complaints that we've heard from the commercial manure applicator industry. So it may not be for everybody, not saying it has to be, but I'm just saying that this is one method that a commercial applicator has come up with for doing straight rows of corn. Eventually, on this field, we did half-mile rows of corn, because on this quarter-mile field, as you go to the left, we went across a dirt road and it did another quarter-mile. And we left the hose humper dead center in the middle of the half-mile, and we were able to do the half-mile hoses, or the half-mile pulls. The only drawback of half miles are when you get to the end of that half mile and you push that clutch in, that hose is kind of half water hose, half rubber band. It throws you backward quite a long distance on that. We also did some fields later with smaller tractors that were quarter mile fields where they put the hose humper in the center of the quarter mile, and that worked out real well indeed, because neither tractor had to be near as big as what we're doing on these larger fields. So again, just to point out, we've got in the background, you see that big gas line that's going up to Detroit, Michigan. That's where we were up in Paulding County. A lot of Palmer Amaranth showed up along where those bulldozers had worked on that. Now, for the field to be fit for a manure application, it's got to be firm enough. Here's a commercial applicator that was playing around on some of his own ground, very loamy soil. Corn was just spiking through, and he put hog manure on at about 6,000 gallons per acre. And you can see the way the hose, it's rolling up the dirt, it's moving the liquid manure off of some parts of the field onto other parts. So this would be an example of a field that really isn't suitable for manure application. So you got to have something firmer. So stale seed beds work really well. No-till works really well. Something with a cover crop works really well. If it's a soft spring-worked field, if it's been beaten with some rainfall, then maybe it'll work too. But you can't have soft spring-tilled ground and expect good results with drag hoses. Generally, most of the drag hoses we've been using have been 5.5s. A big difference between pulling a 5.5 and a 6, just when you figure the volume of the liquid inside the hose. Now, having said all this and encouraged manure to be incorporated, we do have people who do routinely surface apply manure. This is just an example of how we have a lot of people right now that are taking manure, and as soon as a cornfield's planted, up till the corn reaches about the V3 stage, they'll just go across that at an angle. This is 7,000 gallons of swine finishing manure being applied per acre. And I went back and looked at this field a number of times. Where those tractor tracks were, the corn was always a little bit behind. During pollination, it was always a little bit behind. Even though the farmer said it didn't hurt the yield at all, I knew the field was a bit behind wherever those tractor tracks were across. But at least there's a crop being put on a growing field, which I think is a positive. Now, I've met with two groups of commercial applicators, and most of them have said, we are not going to do straight rows of corn. We're not going to put that much pressure on our drag hoses. You know, those things only cost about $18 a foot, so I understand their argument on that. However, I think I'm looking at another research plot that we might be able to find a happy medium. When you look at this angle that we're coming across this field, it dawned on me the other day that in our early research that we used to do, we used these Dietrich sweeps. And because I wasn't a very good tractor driver in my younger days, I took, again, you ran about yay deep. We're at 5.5 inches on these things. But because I wasn't a very good tractor driver, we took these 8-inch sweeps and we made some that were 5.25-inch sweeps to tear out less corn. And yields were fine. We got our manure where we wanted to go. We were doing, again, fairly low rates at 6,000 gallons per acre, 7,000 gallons per acre. But it dawned on me the other day that if we were to take a Dietrich toolbar through corn at an angle instead of straight, this is straight rows, And I've got 13,000 gallons per acre of dairy manure underground on this one. But if I were to come across these fields at an angle, I'm thinking that the stand loss might be as little as 2,000 plants per acre. I would be getting my manure placed in the ground with a Dietrich sweep, no covering wheels, just simply the sweep by itself. So everybody would be happy. The farmer could plant the corn straight. The commercial manure applicator could apply the manure at an angle. So both of them would be happy. They would capture the nitrogen to not have to side dress the field, so the farmer would be happy on that one. And then the manure would be incorporated. So the wildlife people would be disappointed. There wouldn't be any chance to write us up for a manure spill type thing. So I think everybody wins if we can figure out a way that when we're coming across the field like this, that we can incorporate that instead of surface applying it. So I'm looking for a couple more Dietrich sweeps to add to my little research tanker. We're going to do the first one we think this year, see how that works out, see the impact on stand, see the impact on yield, have some commercial fertilizer plots that haven't been tore up to compare it to, and see how that works out. So just a thought on our thought right now. The take-home messages that I had wrapped up for today. Number one, expect new manure application rules in Ohio by this time next year. Something's going to give. I think that we're going to have to accept some, I don't know what they are, but just accept the fact that they could be very sweeping, in matter of fact. Number two, follow the manure application rules. Understand if there's a manure escape, there will be a fine. I think that's really critical. We've reached the end of the rope on avoiding some of these things in my area of the state. Three, spread out your manure application window. I don't know how many people have said, no, wheat's not an option. We're not going to plant wheat as a place to put manure. Okay, well, if you can't, give some thought to cereal rye, harvest it in the spring as straw. Some people have done this before. Get your beans drilled in there, then get your manure on top of them, and then you've got something maybe you can work with. Or put the manure on first, then drill the beans. Maybe you've got something to work with. But we've got to give some thought to not putting all of our eggs in that fall application basket. If it wasn't for that little dry spell there at the end of November, early December, we would have had a lot more liquid manure go out this winter than we had currently. We do want to capture our P and our K. And then we're going to have 3 of these Sidedress Toolbars available in 2018. Due to grant restrictions, they're primarily, not completely, but primarily going to be housed in Paulding, Allglaze, and Crawford counties. But our goal is, if we end up with the way that we like things to work out, we're just going to try to get a 4-wheel drive tractor and stick on the front of each of those 3 toolbars. And just get 100 hours of rental time, and whatever we get done in 100 hours, we're going to get done in 100 hours. Try to side dress fields, try to do whatever we can. Now, even though I'm using them primarily for side dressing, the other 2 times these toolbars should be usable. One would be early spring pre-plant. This time of year, we keep thinking, God, the ground's never going to dry out. We're never going to be able to get manure on fields. But you never know. If you think back to the great drought of 2012, we could have applied manure from about, February 20th until we decided to plant corn sometime in April. We were that dry all year. So these toolbars could be used for early pre-plant in the spring. With the thought process, you would plant corn in the field later. Or we're thinking they could use for fall application, especially in no-till situations, where we could do strip tillage of manure and then come back in there the following spring and plant right into those strips of manure. That should be your starter fertilizer already in that strip. So again, those are the 3 times of the year: early pre-plant, fall strip tillage, or side dressing of the corn are the 3 times we expect they'll be available. YouTube videos, we try to get those out there. The university's got a site that we throw them out on. I'm going to go to the next slide. Ohio State has a nutrient stewardship YouTube site. This is what it is. You can go there. You can look at these videos that I've shown today. I also have a Facebook page, Ohio State Extension Environmental and Manure Management, that I try to put all of my Facebook or all my videos, all my manure research out on those types of things. Or you can just email me and I can send you those links as well, arnold.2@osu.edu. You know, our thought process is we have to continue to figure out ways to use livestock manure. I know that our dairy cow numbers keep slipping in the state. Life is very, very tough for dairy farmers. But we still have a lot of liquid manure that we have to deal with. So we have to figure out ways to use it. That was pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. That kind of sums up my talk. We are at 8:53, so we've got about 7 minutes before the next speaker pops up here. Any questions that I could take from the audience? Yes.
Are they letting you put it on top, like on corn?
We're legal to put manure on top of corn, yes.
And can you do that on cover crop too, like maybe in the fall and stuff like that? Are they letting you not incorporate it? Can you put it right on top?
We can still put it right on top, right. However, remember those curves. The application of nutrients to the soil surface is what's getting us into our green lake, we believe. So we've got to figure out ways to get it in the ground, I believe. So
well, I wasn't thinking maybe a tilled ground. No till. I think when you're using cover crop, I thought that would hold it.
It would help, but still, we concentrate our nutrients on the top of the soil with we use a lot of turbo tills, shallow tillage, and we have a lot of nutrients in that top inch. Our heavy rains in the state have tripled in the last 15 years. Rains of 2 inches or greater. We're up 3 times what they used to be. So when you combine all those nutrients in the top of the soil with the extra heavy rains, we think about 60% of the phosphorus that gets into Lake Erie comes from 10% of the rains that we get in this state. So it's a mess, but we've got to deal with it.
But is that more from the tilled field than the no-tilled field?
No, probably more from no-till, possibly. Again, we concentrate our nutrients, but I don't have any data on that. Yeah, the particulate phosphorus that's attached to soil particles is 1/3 available to algae. The dissolved phosphorus, at least, because there's nothing to attach to on a soil surface, that's 3 times more available. So it's a challenge. Yep.